My name is Dana Mercer. I'm 41 years old, and for 14 years I built a company that moved time-critical pharmaceutical products across 4 states. On time, in compliance, and without ever once asking anyone in my family to pull me back from the edge. I started it with a folding table in a rented room, a second-hand laptop, and a cell phone held together by a rubber band and stubbornness. By the time they took it from me, independent valuations put it at just over $5 million. They did it at a restaurant with cloth napkins and low lighting, the kind of place where people celebrate things. My aunt slid a manila folder across the table. My cousin Rachel opened it before I could. I saw the transfer documents before a single word was spoken. Then my aunt raised her wine glass and said with genuine warmth in her voice, "You've given this everything. Now it's time the family gave Rachel something solid." People at nearby tables must have assumed it was a promotion toast. My uncle nodded with the satisfied expression of a man who had just resolved something. He looked me in the eye and said, "You'll stay involved naturally. In a support capacity. Rachel has a family to think about. She needs this more than you do." Rachel didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She simply placed her palm flat on the folder as though it had always belonged to her. I laughed once. A single involuntary sound, because it was the only thing standing between me and a scene involving broken stemware and a security escort. Then I nodded, stood up, and pushed my chair in so precisely that every person at that table believed I had accepted what just happened. I hadn't accepted anything. I was already gone. The air outside hit me like cold water the moment I pushed through the restaurant door. I stood on the sidewalk for maybe 10 seconds, still hearing the muffled conversation inside, and understood something that was ugly and clarifying at the same time. They hadn't just taken a company. They had removed the last reason I kept giving myself to stay devoted to people who had never extended the same devotion back. I walked 4 blocks in shoes that were destroying my feet and ended up at an all-night diner near a bus terminal. The kind of place with overcooked coffee, flickering neon, and staff who have seen enough late-night distress to know when not to ask questions. From that booth I called Simone Walsh. Simone had been adjacent to my work for nearly a decade. She understood the operational spine of what I had built, and she was the only person in my life who had never once treated my professional success like a shared family asset. She arrived within the hour wearing a winter jacket over hospital clothes, slid into the seat across from me, read my face in about 2 seconds and said, "Walk me through exactly what happened." So I did. I described the folder, the applause, my uncle's voice, my aunt's composed expression, and the specific way Rachel had settled her hand over those documents as though 14 years of my effort had always been her inheritance. Simone listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked the one question no one in my family had ever thought to direct at me. "What do you want now, Dana? Not what makes things easier for everyone else. Not what you can survive. What do you actually want?" I started to answer and almost couldn't finish because the honest version was frightening. I wanted out. I wanted my name over a door that no family vote could close. I wanted a company with contracts, structures, and ownership documents clean enough that no dinner conversation could ever reach it. Then the fear arrived. What if I failed publicly? What if they looked at the wreckage and said they had always known I was nothing without the family framework? Simone reached across the table, took my phone, unlocked it, and handed it back. "Then let failure find you after you've tried. Not before." Right there, with cold food on the table and my pulse still elevated, I removed the old company shortcut from my phone's home screen, left the family operations group chat, and archived every message thread that had spent years teaching me to confuse being useful with being loved. That small act should not have felt as significant as it did. It felt like cutting a fuse. By the time the server refilled our cups, I wasn't talking about what had been done to me. I was talking about market positioning, client relationships, timeline, and how fast I could move in an industry I understood more deeply than anyone who had just voted themselves into my seat. That night, I stopped being their engine and started being my own way out. I was awake before sunrise the next morning, not by choice but because betrayal has a physical component. It drags you upright before your body is ready. I sat at my kitchen counter in an old sweatshirt, hair still tied back from the night before, staring at my laptop like it was either the opening chapter of something or the evidence of a catastrophic error in judgment. My phone lit up repeatedly. My aunt called twice. My uncle sent a text, "Don't make this into something it isn't." Then Rachel sent the message that irritated me more than all the others combined. "We should talk once you've settled down." Settled down. That was their language for a woman who had been robbed gracefully and declined to thank them for the experience. I turned the phone face down and opened my laptop. For 14 years, the company's real infrastructure had lived inside me. The contingency routing protocols. The vendor escalation trees. The emergency recovery sequences for cold chain failures at 2 in the morning during a snowstorm when everyone else was panicking and calling me. Those procedures existed in documents and servers, yes, but the judgment that made them work, that had never been transferable. My family believed they were acquiring a company. What they were actually doing was testing whether the shell could function without the person who had designed it from the inside. Still, I was going to be meticulous. I would not give them any surface to call me erratic, dishonest, or destabilizing. I went through every personal drive, every archived folder, every cloud account and separated what was mine from what was theirs. I removed access I had set up on personal devices for convenience. I cleared out saved templates, billing drafts, scheduling backups, and vendor documentation I had written on my own time to keep operations running when no one else could. It was not sabotage. It was precision. It was me refusing to leave my expertise embedded in a structure that had already decided I was disposable. Around 8:30 I made coffee strong enough to be called aggressive and opened a blank notepad. At the top I wrote one question. What can they keep and what will always be mine? The answer came quickly. They could keep the office, the brand, the accounts, the furniture, and the comfortable story they would tell at future dinners. What they could not keep was my knowledge of the market, the trust of clients who knew who had actually solved their problems, my reputation when things went sideways, and the quiet, documented truth that the business ran because of my judgment, not their name. Once I saw that clearly, the fear in my chest changed shape. It stopped sounding like I'm finished and started sounding like move fast, move smart, move clean. By 9:30 I had checked 3 company names and verified domain availability. By 10 o'clock I had an attorney on the phone, someone I trusted from a compliance dispute years earlier. And by mid-afternoon, Mercer Critical Logistics existed as a legal entity, built specifically around emergency cold chain strategy, high-risk medical transport, and continuity planning for time-sensitive pharmaceutical operations. The name was intentionally plain. No warmth. No family flourish. Just the kind of clarity that sounds authoritative in a crisis. Then came the harder part. I refused to send one of those breathless announcements people post when they're trying to dress humiliation up as reinvention. I didn't need an audience. I needed traction. I made a list of 29 contacts. I narrowed it to 6. The people whose professional respect I valued enough to risk hearing no from. I wrote each message individually. No bulk email. No emotional disclosure. Just clean language. I had launched an independent firm. I was available for specialized advisory and urgent operational support. I would welcome a private conversation if the timing was ever right. Then I hovered over the trackpad for a long moment. Have you ever sent something that felt less like a message and more like a bet placed against your own fear? I hit send on all 6. Closed my eyes. Listened to the silence in the apartment. For a few seconds it was almost unbearable. Then something in me steadied, because regardless of what came back, I had done the one thing no one in that family had expected. I had stopped waiting to be recognized and started making myself impossible to overlook. The first weeks were not inspirational. They were exhausting in ways that don't photograph well. I worked from my apartment, from my car, from hotel lobbies, and once from a corridor outside a hospital conference room because the signal was better there than anywhere downstairs. My meals became whatever could be managed single-handed while reviewing incident reports. My wardrobe collapsed into a reliable rotation of dark blazers, plain trousers, and backup shoes that lived in a bag in my backseat. It wasn't freedom yet. It was construction. But construction has its own rhythm if you stay with it. The first real signal came on a Wednesday afternoon when an operations director from a regional cancer treatment network called me directly. A refrigerated shipment had stalled, their contingency routing had collapsed, and no one on their current vendor side was giving them a straight answer. We hadn't worked together independently before, but she had known my work from my previous company. She said, "I was hoping you'd be reachable. You were always the person who actually resolved things." I handled it in under 4 hours, sent a full post-incident summary that evening, and the next morning she referred me to a contact at a specialty pharmacy. Within the week, a lab administrator had reached out asking about continuity planning for high-value weekend shipments. Momentum in this industry works strangely. For weeks it's invisible, like pushing something heavy uphill through the dark. Then one morning you look up and the weight is moving on its own. By the end of the second month, I had 3 active consulting relationships, 1 retainer offer, and enough incoming interest to stop pretending this was a temporary arrangement. I brought on a part-time compliance analyst. I leased a small office suite above an optometry practice in a quiet part of town. Practical, affordable, unshowy. 1 good desk. 2 chairs. A whiteboard. A coffee machine that sounded like it resented being awake. It was exactly right. It was mine. Around that time, the industry whispers about my former company started acquiring more specific edges. First it was vague, delayed renewals, murmured staff changes. Then the direct messages started arriving. Former client contacts writing things like, "We heard about the leadership restructure. Are you available independently? And we're looking for someone with your background in cold chain recovery." I kept every response professional, measured, and completely free of commentary about the old company. I didn't need to say anything. Their own decisions were already speaking. The most clarifying message came from a hospital procurement director who had been one of the most demanding accounts I had ever managed. His email was short. "Candidly, our confidence was tied to you, not to the brand. We'd like to discuss direct support going forward." I read it 3 times. Not out of surprise, but because there is a particular kind of satisfaction in watching reality say, plainly and without drama, what you were required to absorb in silence. Rachel had made changes in all the wrong places. She reduced carrier vetting standards to accelerate margins. She removed 2 senior dispatch coordinators she described as resistant, when what they were actually resisting was poor judgment. She deferred maintenance on temperature monitoring systems to cut costs. She stopped consulting the people who understood which small failures become expensive disasters. Most critically, she spoke to long-term clients as though their loyalty was attached to the family name rather than to the operational standards I had spent 14 years establishing. That assumption cost them 2 of their largest accounts within 8 weeks. 1 left for a competitor immediately, and the other did something my family found considerably harder to absorb. They requested a transition consultation. With me. Not with the company. Not with the board. Not with the new leadership. With me personally. That was the moment I fully understood the difference between revenge as fantasy and accountability as reality. Fantasy revenge is theatrical. It overturns tables and makes speeches. Actual accountability is quieter. It's the market correcting a false narrative after you step away. It's clients choosing competence over a surname. It's the people who underestimated you discovering that what they dismissed as support was actually the entire load-bearing structure. Meanwhile, I was building something leaner and harder to dismantle. That was also when Callum Reed entered the story. Callum had spent years in regulatory operations for a national diagnostics organization, and his professional reputation was similar to mine. Composed in crises, unimpressed by presentations that dissolved under real conditions, and deeply skeptical of companies that prioritized appearances over systems. He emailed me saying he had heard I was building something serious, and we met at a restaurant near the river. I liked him immediately because he skipped the flattery entirely and went straight to questions. Client mix, capacity limits, escalation structure, long-term scope. At one point he set his cup down and said, "Your old company didn't lose its value because a title changed hands. It lost value because the only person who understood how the whole organism worked walked out of the building." That sentence stayed with me for weeks. Callum eventually joined as a strategic operations consultant. Together we tightened service packages, clarified pricing, built a cleaner response framework for emergency contracts, and began pursuing larger institutional networks that would have been out of reach for me alone. It was the kind of progress that makes you believe the damage might eventually become an asset. Then Rachel texted. It arrived in the middle of a Thursday afternoon. "Can we meet? Please don't ignore this. It matters." I looked at it, locked the screen, and went back to work. 5 minutes later. "I'm asking as your cousin, not as the company. People only separate themselves from the institution when the institution stops protecting them." I didn't respond that day or the next. On Saturday morning came a final message. "Please." I agreed to meet at a public place by the waterfront. I had no interest in a private room with someone who had smiled pleasantly while my professional life was redistributed over the main course. When I saw her walking toward me, I knew before she said anything that the situation had deteriorated well past the rumors. She was still dressed carefully, still composed on the surface, but there was something brittle in it. The kind of polish that is holding something in rather than projecting anything outward. She sat down, offered a practiced smile, and opened with, "You look well." I said, "You look like you haven't slept in a while." Because I had stopped performing pleasantries with people who had helped themselves to 14 years of my work. She started with the executive version. Market volatility, transition complexity, staffing adjustments, and I let her exhaust it because the fastest route to the real conversation is usually patience. Eventually she got there. "I think I underestimated how much of it was you specifically," she said. "My parents kept saying you always made things sound more complicated than they were. I think I chose to believe them." I said nothing. Silence is productive when someone is finally listening to themselves. The facts came out in pieces. Significant revenue decline. Multiple staff departures pending. Vendor confidence dropping. A line of credit under formal review. A long-tenured manager who had resigned after being overruled on a compliance issue. 2 major accounts requesting leadership conversations. Then she reached the actual reason for the meeting. "Come back," she said. "Not in a subordinate role. More as a co-leadership arrangement. A strategic partnership. We can frame it that way publicly." The audacity was almost impressive. 5 months earlier I had been told I would report to her because she had children and needed something stable. Now she was offering beside as though it were a significant concession. "No," I said. Her expression shifted. "Dana, be realistic." The entitlement was back briefly, clean and familiar. "You've built a decent small operation. But this company still has scale, existing client contracts, capital and infrastructure. We can still fix this if you stop treating it like a personal grievance." Desperation wearing the costume of condescension. I leaned slightly forward and kept my voice low. "I'm not being stubborn. I'm being expensive." She was quiet. Then softer. "My mother always said you were the capable one. She said you didn't need things the way I did. She said I deserved stability and you'd land somewhere no matter what." I held her gaze. "And that made it acceptable to transfer what I built?" She opened her mouth. Closed it. The first genuine shame I had seen on her face since any of this began. "I thought I'd grow into it," she said eventually. "I thought once it was officially mine I'd figure the rest out." That sentence explained everything. She hadn't wanted to construct something. She had wanted to arrive somewhere already built and be recognized for occupying it. Ownership was supposed to produce capability. It doesn't work that way. As we stood to leave, she made one last attempt. So that's your answer? You're going to watch us go under. I looked at her for a moment before responding. No. I'm going to keep doing what everyone assumed anyone could do. Then I left. 3 days later, my aunt called from her personal number. I answered because I wanted to hear what desperation sounds like once it has stopped trying to be elegant. She opened with her most reasonable voice. She said the company was under pressure. He said Rachel was struggling. She said the family name was at risk. As if the family name had ever managed a crisis shipment at midnight or talked a panicked clinic director through a compliance emergency at 2 in the morning. Then she said the thing that made my answer simple. You know, Rachel isn't built for this kind of pressure the way you are. I closed my eyes. There was again. Not accountability. Not remorse. Just another attempt to convert my capability into my obligation. So you knew, I said quietly. You knew she wasn't suited for it. And you transferred it to her regardless. She paused just long enough to answer the question without speaking. She needed the security, my aunt said. You always find your footing. There are sentences that stay with you word for the rest of your life. Not because they are devastating, but because they finally make the entire pattern visible. That was one. It exposed the family arithmetic I had been living inside for decades. Give the difficult work to the one who handles it well. Give the rewards to the one who needs them most, and frame the whole arrangement as love. She asked me to come into the office. I said no. She pressed. I said no again. My uncle took the phone and used the authoritative tone that had once been able to redirect me when I was younger and still mistook volume for wisdom. You don't get to punish this family because you're hurting, he said. This is emotion, not strategy. I laughed directly into the phone. What I'm doing, I said, is called consequences. Then I ended the call. That should have been the end of it. That evening, Rachel emailed me with a subject line that just read, I'll do anything. I ignored it. She sent another the next morning, longer, and for the first time there was nothing performative in it. No legacy language, no title negotiation, no family framing. Just numbers. Revenue down 39%. 3 resignations pending. Credit review underway. Clients requesting formal reassurances about operational continuity. And then one sentence near the bottom that stopped me completely. I have spent years being quietly envious that people respected you in ways they never respected me, and I let that envy make me into someone I don't actually want to be. That didn't erase what had happened, but it made me pause. I agreed to one meeting. On my terms. At their office. Without her parents in the room. When I walked into that building for the first time since leaving, it felt smaller. Not in dimension but in weight. The reception staff looked uncertain when they saw me, as though they hadn't been briefed on whether to be relieved or awkward. Rachel was in the conference room. No attorney. No presentation. Just a legal pad and eyes that were clearly not well rested. My parents aren't here, she said. I told them this was mine to deal with. That was the first genuinely competent thing I had heard from her. I sat down and told her before she could begin, I'm not returning to this company. I'm not accepting a title here. I'm not absorbing the consequences of your decision. That's not what today is. She nodded slowly. Is there anything you would consider doing? She asked. I thought about it carefully because this was the moment where most stories of this kind choose spectacle over meaning. I didn't want spectacle. I wanted honesty with a real cost attached. Possibly. One condition. She looked up. You record a statement. Published on your company's professional channels. No softened language. No vague references to leadership transitions. You state that the handover was mismanaged. That operational expertise was disregarded. That staff concerns were dismissed. That the foundation of this business was built by someone your family then voted out. You apologize to the employees who raised valid objections. You apologize to the clients who were misled. And you do it yourself, not drafted by a communications firm, not edited into something comfortable. The color left her face. Publicly. Yes. My mother will never agree to that. Then call her and tell her I said the answer is no. She looked at the table for a long time. I could almost track the calculation, what pride costs versus what survival requires. If I do it, she said quietly, would you help? I kept my answer exact. I won't rescue the company. I will review your recovery framework once. I will introduce you to one manageable client opportunity that suits your current capacity. I will tell you specifically what has to change if you want any realistic chance of stabilizing. That is the entirety of what I'm offering. He absorbed that. Then she nodded. All right. Rachel posted the video 48 hours later. She sat in a plain conference room. No branded backdrop, no coaching, no visible script, and said what should have been said 6 months earlier. She acknowledged the transition had been handled badly. She stated that the systems, the client relationships, and the operational credibility of the business had been built by me over 14 years. She confirmed that experienced staff had raised concerns that leadership chose to dismiss. She apologized to employees for the instability, and to clients for the erosion of confidence they had experienced. Her voice was unsteady. She looked genuinely uncomfortable. As it should be. Some truths are supposed to cost something when you finally say them out loud. My aunt was furious. My uncle called it an embarrassment. But embarrassment was the affordable version of what they had nearly caused. A full organizational collapse would have been significantly more expensive. To clients, to vendors, to staff, and eventually to them. I watched the video once. Sent Rachel a 3-page recovery memo. And kept my word precisely as stated. No more, no less. I connected her with one small regional client group needing short-term pharmaceutical transport support. A manageable account. Not a windfall. Then I stepped back entirely. The old company survived, but only partially. They never recovered roughly 40% of lost revenue. Several major clients did not return. Key personnel declined to come back despite outreach. The bank maintained tighter oversight. The family learned the difference between inheriting something and being capable of running it. In the most expensive way that lesson tends to arrive. One is paperwork. The other is judgment. Meanwhile, Mercer Critical Logistics kept building. Callum formalized his role. Simone helped me recruit a stronger operations coordinator. In the 6th month, we signed the largest contract of my career. A 7-figure emergency response and continuity agreement with a multi-state specialty care network. In their formal communication confirming the partnership, they wrote, "Demonstrated leadership credibility carries more weight for us than institutional legacy." I printed that line and kept it in my desk drawer for a week before I framed it. Not to display arrogance. Because after 14 years of being essential and invisible, it felt important to have one clean piece of language that simply told the truth. A month later I stood outside my office the morning the exterior signage was installed. Mercer Critical Logistics. My lease. My liability. My structure. My future. From that corner past 2 buildings and a stretch of traffic, you could just make out the older office tower where the family company still operated under a reduced footprint, a diminished client list, and a very different kind of quietness than the one I had walked away from. I looked for a moment. Then I looked away. That mattered, the looking away. The earlier version of me would have stood there measuring, calculating whether the distance felt like justice, replaying the dinner, checking whether the outcome looked satisfying enough from the outside. The person standing there that morning understood something more useful. The deepest form of moving on is not obsession. It's detachment with a clear record. Rachel and I are not close, but we are honest in a way we never managed before. She learned to stop requesting shortcuts dressed up as family loyalty. I learned to stop lending my competence to people who only noticed it once they no longer had access to it. My aunt still hasn't fully reconciled herself to the fact that I didn't return and restore the family narrative. My uncle still occasionally reaches for the old commanding tone, though not in conversations with me. They did eventually ask me to come back. 5 months after that dinner under the chandeliers, they asked. But the moment that changed my life wasn't when they asked. It was when I walked out. Because that was the night I understood that people can take your title, your office, your company, your seat at the table, and 14 years of everything you built. But they cannot take the mind that built it unless you surrender that too. I didn't surrender it. I kept it. I refined it. I rebuilt with it. And that is the lesson underneath every story like this one. Winning is not the collapse of the people who undervalued you. Winning is constructing a version of your life they can no longer redefine, redistribute, or claim as their own contribution. So here is the question I'll leave you with. If your own family took the product of 14 years of your work and handed it to someone else over dinner, would you do what I did? Set one clear condition, offer limited and specific help, and keep walking forward? Or would you let them face the full weight of what they created? I genuinely want to know.